Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com. Fired up to be here. Heck of a Thursday night game between LSU and Oklahoma. We'll talk a whole bunch about that here in just a minute. We're also going to preview the rest of the weekend around the SEC. And spoiler alert, Mother Nature is not really happy this weekend, so you're going to have to probably pack your patience in terms of knowing when game times are going to happen or if games are going to get in. TBD on all of that. So we'll jump into all that in just a second. But first, I have to remind you that this episode of Weekend Waypoints and every episode of Weekend Waypoints this season is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing fun with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1-hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com orders. Like I said, how do you not come into this this show fired up about what you saw last night? I guess if you're an Oklahoma fan, it wasn't ideal, but man, what a pitcher's duel, and we just don't get a lot of those in college baseball. Certainly not in the SEC with as good offensively as this league is now. It was just a breath of fresh air to get one of those again. Like, it felt like we used to get a little more often in college baseball. And LSU wins at 2-0. I guess I should mention the score. Kyson Witherspoon pitched great too. Like there really wasn't, he didn't do anything really wrong. That performance is going to win just about any other game, with the way he pitched. And, credit to a couple of good swings for LSU, Jared Jones, in a 2-strike count, taking a ball a little bit off the plate, maybe taking it the other way. And I thought Todd Walker on the broadcast did a good job of enumerating the ways in which Jared Jones is just a better hitter this year. And that's that pitch. It's like a cutter that's just sliding off the plate. Last year, a year before, he might try to pull that ball and he rolls it over to third base or shortstop, and that inning's over. Instead, he flicks it into right field for an RBI single. And then, Chris Stanfield kind of similarly, his RBI double is, really a ball kind of bearing in on him, but he pulls his hands in and gets the barrel to it, shoots it the other way. And it's a good piece of hitting as well. And so that pitch missed a little more, probably wasn't where ultimately Witherspoon would have wanted to put it, but those are just good pieces of hitting by LSU. And so a great outing there for Kyson and just a tough luck loss. Those things happen. A couple of milestones here. It is the first shutout of first complete game of any kind since Paul Skeens against Tulane in the 2023 regional. It is the first complete game shutout for an LSU pitcher since AJ Labus versus Lamar, April 24th, 2018. First complete game shutout against an SEC foe since Alex Lang against Auburn, May 11th, 2017. So suffice it to say, Kade Anderson doing something that we haven't seen in a good long while in an LSU uniform. It really impressive stuff there. A couple of other thoughts here. One is thoughts are with Nate Yeske and his family. Father passed away yesterday. He was still there calling pitches. And so I know a lot of folks in the media have had interactions with Nate Yeske's dad. Like, you're in Omaha when Oregon State was there, when he was there with Arizona, what have you. Have met him. And, so it's that one hits a little harder when you know the person they're talking about. So thoughts are with Nate Yeske and his family after that. Should be an interesting next couple of days in this series. Oklahoma's going to have to get good pitching the next 2 days. And that's been more of a question for them after Kyson, right? So that's going to be really important because this LSU offense is not going to be limited to 2 runs in most games. With somebody with Kyson on the mound, sure, obviously, because he's an elite pitcher. But the next 2 days, Oklahoma's going to have to put up some resistance. And similarly, LSU too, of course. But I think there's a little more proof in the pudding there with Ianson, Shores, etc. That obviously they didn't have to use any bullpen. So you still got Zach Cowan available for LSU. You still got Kason Evans available. And, Oklahoma only used 1 bullpen arm, so they're pretty rested too. The other factor here, as I mentioned up top, the weather's not looking great this weekend in Norman the next couple of days. So it could be a dodging raindrop situation. It could be a doubleheader Saturday. It could, who knows? I think everything is on the table. I will say the SEC is pretty good about getting its games in. Like, it doesn't often have just total washouts of games. Now, you might have some late nights. We had some last week with LSU and Mississippi State. So for Tiger fans, this is nothing new. But they're pretty good as a league about getting them in a way that some other leagues just aren't. And that's not necessarily a critique, but some leagues are a little more okay with, hey, we were scheduled to play 30 league games and we only got 28. The SEC tends to get its 30 games in. So I think that's a credit to the league. So I'm confident they will find a way, but we just might have to be patient this weekend. A lot of comments waiting. So let's go ahead and flip over to those real quick. If you'll bear with me as I kind of read through them here. Daniel Ordoin says, yeah, I want to hear that take on the epic night from Kade. It's obviously baseball and anything can happen, but at this point in the series, the win is expected and the sweep is looking nice. I mean, sure, you win the first game, you start to assume series win. Obviously, that's dangerous. Oklahoma's good enough to win these next two, certainly at home. But yeah, the performance for Kade, I mean, best pitching performance I've seen this year. I mean, I guess there's been some no hitters against non-conference foes and in other conferences and what have you. But considering the opponent, considering it's on the road, considering it was 135 pitches, like all of the above, incredible performance. Really enjoyed it. I should have brought this up earlier. I was talking to somebody last night during the performance. Let's just call him an evaluator whose opinion I trust. He asked kind of just rhetorically, he asked, am I crazy for maybe liking Kade Anderson more than Jamie Arnold, who is Florida State's ace left-hander? And he kind of backed that all. After he said it, he was like, well, maybe not. But the larger point, though, is interesting, where it's like, Kade Anderson really is making himself some money, certainly last night, but really all season. He's shown a lot. So even if that was a little bit of an overreaction in the moment, I think that the larger point there is interesting, which is that he's now being kind of considered in a different tier among people who do this for a living. So interesting stuff there. Caleb Falk says, heck of performance from Kade. Wasn't sure if Jay would let him go that many pitches. 50 scouts in the stands as well. Yeah, I heard that too. And that'll help. Good way to start off the series. Fresh bullpen for final two games. Yeah, agree on all that. And I think Daniel brings up a good point. Let me piggyback on this one. The pitches are concerning if you just see it, but watching the game, he never looked labored at all. That plus the extra day of rest going into next week's Friday start. I think it's just what he needed. Yeah, certainly. 135 is a lot. I'm not going to argue otherwise, but I do think there is something to how many of those pitches were stressful. How many of those pitches were, how many long innings did he have? And the answer is very few on both of those questions. So I think that's one factor. It's also that, Kade Anderson has really good stuff, but he's not out there throwing 99 max effort. And so there is also something to that. It's just different. He's also not a high 80s lefty, so I'm not going to pretend like he is, but there's a little less effort there than there are with some of these guys who are out there touching 100. And so I do think 135 is a lot, but it did not feel reckless to me. That's just my take. I think reasonable people can differ there. I think there's also an argument for, hey, you in a close game like that, it makes sense to maybe go to your bullpen guys, give people different looks. So from a strategy standpoint, I think there's also an argument to be made, to go to the bullpen there, but obviously it worked out. And so I'm not too bothered by the number. It is a big number, but I'm not too been out of shape about it. All right. Scrolling through, asking for a friend. Vandy boys playing with wooden bats. We'll circle back on Vanderbilt here in just a little bit. That's a funny question though. Adam LeMarie says Kade Anderson is superb. What a gym against Oklahoma. Yep, agreed, 100%. Adam also says, and give me a comment here if I'm pronouncing that right, Adam. Is it LeMarie? He says, give a call to Derek Curiel as well. What a freshman. Yeah, I mean, he had a really good at-bat early in that game. Where he showed it's just the maturity for a freshman to kind of understand how to have a good approach at the plate, how to have a plan, not trying to do too much, understanding the barrel. That sounds pretty simple, but understanding that the key is to get the barrel to the ball, not necessarily to get your best swing off, because if you get the barrel to the ball, that's obviously what's most important, right? You want to swing hard, but if you get the barrel to, you don't have to swing that hard, right? So just has a really good understanding of the game. I'll be interested to see next season, obviously with Stanfield here. This is something they talked about on the broadcast last night, that with Stanfield playing center field right now, he's not going to get a shot at center, but he's a future center fielder. I think he's got the athleticism for it. So that'll be interesting to see next year. But yeah, he's been awesome. He's been every bit as good as LSU could have reasonably hoped him to be, and then some. And he's arguably behind Jones, kind of the guy that makes that lineup go. And that's a lot as a freshman. Like that's a lot to put on a freshman, but I think he's earned it, and he's proved that he can be that guy. All right. What else we got? Let me make sure we have all the I wanted to make sure we had all the kind of LSU related comments that were pertinent before I move on to some other topics here. All right. Yeah. So we will, Patrick Yankee says, looking very rough here in Lexington today. Yeah, that one, it's a good point, because that one got postponed yesterday, doubleheader today, theoretically. We'll see. So that's kind of a bummer. That's an interesting series, Kentucky and Ole Miss. And obviously even with a doubleheader, if they have to move games again, if they have games tomorrow and have to shorten them to 7 innings, like it just changes the series. It becomes a different type of deal. So, you want series to be able to go as scheduled, because that's the truest test of teams, but it is what it is. All right. We'll get to some of the weekend preview stuff. I see the other questions in here, and I will address them kind of as we go. So Moonshine's Vanderbilt question. I see Griffin Smith says, happy Iron Bowl of baseball weekend. Yeah, we'll talk about that. There's a question here about Michael Early. We'll talk about A&M. Certainly they're playing Tennessee this weekend, which is not exactly where you want to go when you're really scuffling. So let's get to some of the preview stuff here. So we just talked about Kentucky Ole Miss. Let's dive in a little more on that series. If the doubleheader gets played, whether it's today or they do a doubleheader tomorrow, could be a lot of runs there. And neither team is pitching all that well in SEC play. Ole Miss has the third highest ERA in SEC play. Kentucky has the fourth highest ERA in SEC play. So two teams that are kind of offense first. A couple questions I have is who gets more from their starting pitchers not named Hunter Elliott and Ben Cleaver. Those have been the two guys that have been most consistent for these two teams. What else do they get in a starting role? After that is going to be key there. The other is, can Ryan Moorman get on track for Ole Miss? Mitchell Sanford has picked up a lot of slack there, but Ryan Moorman was really hot during non-conference play, and he's cooled a little bit as SEC plays got underway. That's understandable. Obviously, the quality of pitching jumps up, but still, he's a guy who's capable of really helping carry a heavy load for this lineup. Ole Miss is going to need him. So can he get going back in the right direction for Ole Miss? Georgia and Texas, this is the series of the week. As you are watching this now, did just now realize I left Patrick's comment up there. We'll remove that. My bad. As you're reading this now, that post is up at d1baseball.com. The series of the week post, I have a detailed breakdown of that series. Should be a lot of fun. The biggest question for Texas is just not only this weekend, but moving forward, how well do they weather these injuries? Max Ballou gone for the year. That's the long-term one. But the other two, Rylan Galvan, maybe more of a DH for right now after taking a foul ball off his throwing hand. He's their catcher. And then Adrian Rodriguez, their fabulous freshman, third baseman, seemed kind of like a coin flip whether Texas would have him this weekend. So those are more of the short-term questions. But obviously, playing Georgia is not exactly the situation you want to be in when you're dealing with some of those injuries. But my question for Georgia is has the pitching really come around? I've been saying it on radio hits that I've done, D1 baseball podcasts. Like, it feels like Georgia's pitching is coming around, and in some ways it is. Brian Curley to the rotation has been helpful. Colton Smith has looked like himself more recently. I like what I've seen from Matthew Hoskins as kind of a piggyback guy. So I think there have been some positives, but in the big picture, it's still not looking exactly like we thought it would look. Still kind of waiting on Leighton Finley to come around. Charlie Goldstein's ERA is still inflated. It just hasn't looked like we thought it would. And so while it's better, I still think there's a long way to go for Georgia. Do we see more progress this weekend, or is a good veteran Texas lineup, even without Ballou and potentially a couple of others, able to kind of put some pressure on Georgia in a way that exposes some of the pitching again? Texas pitching, meanwhile, not as sexy as Georgia's pitching. Like Georgia's got a parade of guys throwing close to 100. Texas doesn't necessarily have that outside of, Jared Spencer's the hard thrower. But they've been really good. They are second in the conference play in ERA. Tops in conference play in ERA, second in overall ERA in the SEC. Questions there. What do they do with Ruger Riojas and Dylan Volantis? They've got a TBA on Sunday. I'd like to think that they've kind of got an eye on that. Could be Riojas starting, who threw 7 shutout last weekend against Missouri, or Dylan Volantis, who's got one of the best arms on the team. But it's a kind of deal where if they need him in relief the first 2 days, they'll go to them. If one of them happens to be not used by Sunday, then maybe one of those guys starts. I just kind of think it's going to be a wait and see, but those 2 guys are really important pieces of the puzzle for Texas and what should be a fun series. First time Georgia has ever played in Austin. That was kind of surprising to me. I mean, obviously they've been in different conferences for all that time, but still, the history is long. I would have thought there would have been a situation where they would have gone there for a regional or a super or something at a bare minimum, but nope, first time. And that's always interesting. Bama and Auburn. Here's the Iron Bowl. First things first, Riley Quick back in the rotation for Alabama. That is a big deal, obviously. Even if he's a step back from where he was, just having him is they'd rather have him than not, right? Even if he's 80% of what he was before that blood blister cropped up. So that's obviously good. What's kind of interesting to me in the big picture here is if Alabama wins this series, I do wonder if we have to start to talk about them a little differently. As to this point, I've not really considered them in the same class as, Tennessee, Arkansas, LSU, Georgia, that group, Texas, right? But their only series losses to Tennessee, and the only loss in the SEC other than that, the 2 to Tennessee, was a 1-run loss to Oklahoma. So if they win this series on the road against Auburn, is it time to start talking about them in that group? I mean, on paper, the roster is just not quite as strong. I have questions on the mound for Alabama, but I don't know. We'll see. I'll have to kind of see how I feel after the series. And of course, if they don't win it, this is all a moot point, but it is interesting. It feels like maybe, and look, they're ranked in the top 10. So it's not like we're totally ignoring Alabama, but it just doesn't feel like we've considered them in the upper crust of the league. And if they win this series, maybe it's time to start having that conversation. On the Auburn side, Cade Fisher has been moving in the right direction. We'll see what the ultimate end game is with him. Is there a point where he gets really stretched out, or is he just going to kind of be like a 4-inning guy? And if it's quality 4 innings, you'll take that. But that is something I'm monitoring. Also on the Auburn offense, I really like the players on the Auburn offense. I've talked pretty positively about the lineup on this show, on Highway to Hoover, on other podcasts, but they're hitting .231 in SEC play. So that's going to have to get better because their pitching is not so good that they can overcome hitting .231 in conference play. So that's going to have to start turning around really this weekend, pretty much ASAP to get Auburn moving in the right direction. All right, let me flip over to some comments real quick, and then we will pick it back up with Vanderbilt. And we will explore whether they're using wood bats, as Moonshine asked earlier in the show. See your Tennessee questions. Okay, cool. Jake and Sam, I see your Tennessee questions. We'll get to Tennessee and A&M here in just a minute. I'll go ahead and address those once we get there. So hang tight. All right, Vanderbilt, Florida. Moonshine asks, is Vanderbilt using wood bats? We're gonna go no. They're certainly out the torpedo wood bats. So that the performance hasn't been. My colleague Mike Rooney has been talking up Vanderbilt's lineup as like, hey, it's not great right now, but they have more ceiling than what they're showing right now, and that might be true. I'm not going to dismiss that necessarily, but I just don't know that I totally agree. I mean, Brody Johnston is struggling a little bit with getting pitched to in a way that early in the season he wasn't. He doesn't take very many walks. It's a lot of swings. He makes a decent amount of contact. His strikeout rate is relatively high, but not crazy. But so he's been slowed. RJ Austin's average is probably 30, 40 points lower than what I thought it would be. Jaden Davis has never gotten going. There are other examples of guys who just really have never gotten going. And I just have to wonder if this is kind of what they are. Now, I will say it does feel like they've landed on some really good stuff on the mound. Obviously, JD Thompson is proven. Cody Bowker's exceeded expectations. Connor Fennell is, we talked about how funny he is to watch because he just pitches different than what you see. He's been kind of a revelation. So there's been some good stuff on the mound. And I guess I'll agree generally that Vanderbilt's position players are better than what we've seen, but I don't know that they're so much better that we can expect wildly different results. We'll see, but I'm just not as bought in, I guess, as Runes is on that position player group. On a different note, this feels like the for real last chance for Florida here. You're 1-8 in the conference. If you lose this series, at best, if you lose a series, you're 2-10. I mean, LSU was 3-12 last year, so I keep going back to that comparison. But I think the difference is that LSU team had run through a gauntlet of a schedule, and we still felt really good about the players they had. With Florida, I just wonder if they're just too injured now to really be able to make that push. You know, like we now know Cade Curlin's gone for the year, in addition to Kyle Jones, who they haven't had since opening weekend, basically. So, you know, that almost doesn't even count. But, you know, Liam Peterson's back in the rotation this week, but he's obviously kind of been in and out. Pierce Capola is kind of like a question mark. And it's not like this was a roster that didn't have some questions even before all that, right? We wondered if the offense was going to be kind of stagnant in a world where Cags wasn't there to, you know, finish off rallies with 3-run home runs, right? And so there was that, and then there was, are these young pitchers ready to take steps forward? And the answer to a lot of that has been yes. So certainly they'd be better if they were healthier. I'm not going to argue that, but the combination of maybe this being a somewhat incomplete roster, especially on the lineup piece, along with the injuries now, you just wonder if, even if they start playing better, if they're going to have enough to get it done. But certainly regardless, this weekend kind of feels like a last chance here for Vanderbilt. South Carolina and Mississippi State, speaking of last chances, this is the last chance bowl. Both teams are 1-8. The team that loses this series is going to be in real tough shape. There's just no other way to put that. For South Carolina, they have to find good outings on the mound some way, somehow. They've got to, you know, put something together. I like what I've seen from Jarvis Evans. He's kind of a tricky lefty. You know, does that continue this weekend? Jake McCoy's stuff is better than what his results have been. Does he put together a really good start? Unsure of Dylan Eskew's availability. You know, he was a guy that got hit with I believe it was a home run in batting practice, had a concussion, recovered from that, but then had strained a muscle in his side as he was getting ready to come back. So that's what's kept him out now. So a lot going on there. But it just feels like they're short on the mound. They need something this weekend. Mississippi State just really, this series is at home. I like their pitching better. I like their lineup better. I like everything about Mississippi State's team better, especially this weekend, given that they're at home. They just can't beat themselves. They're fielding 955 in SEC play, and that's just not going to get it done, especially against a team like South Carolina. I like Mississippi State's talent better, but if you leave that door open and give South Carolina extra outs, any SEC team is going to be able to take advantage of that. So you just can't beat yourself this weekend is kind of the key for me with Mississippi State. Again, whoever wins this series kind of feels like, all right, we've got some life, right? But the one who loses it, I think, is going to be facing a very different reality. All right, A&M and Tennessee. Let's get back over to some of these comments here. Jake first asked, higher than 50% chance early is let go by season's end. First of all, I'll leave the specifics to Kendall on that because Kendall is our official coaching carousel reporter. He's just so plugged in on that stuff. But I would say it's if he is let go, I can't imagine them doing it in this season, especially if this season really starts to get sideways. Because there just isn't a lot to gain from that. So I would think that regardless of how it goes, almost regardless of how it goes, if for some reason they make a push, but they're still struggling, maybe you could make an argument, hey, we need a fresh voice in the dugout. But I don't even see that. I think they'll let him finish it out regardless. But yeah, I mean, certainly if this season continues in this direction, like it's going to have to be a conversation. I don't know where they'll land on that. I generally am not a huge supporter of turning things over that quickly, but there's really no argument that you can make that this season was anything but a massive disappointment if it continues at this rate. And with Tennessee being the series this weekend, it's hard to imagine it going a different way, at least right now. A couple of related things here. Jake also asked, do you see AJ Russell eventually taking over a starting spot, maybe over Coons, or becoming a lockdown closer, i.e. Nate Snead? And then Sam Smith came in with Tennessee beat guys. Shout out to the Tennessee beat. Some of my favorite guys to share a press box with on the whether it's in Knoxville or in Hoover, Omaha, wherever it is. Those are good guys. Tennessee beat guys have said the plan is for AJ to start on Sunday. AJ will go 2 innings on Tuesday. And then Jake says, I get that's the plan, but man, the 2 freshmen have to maybe make you reconsider. Yeah, so I think Jake's point is good. The way they've used Coons and Krenzel on Sundays, I like that. I think that will more or less continue. But I do think, and Sam makes this point later, that I think it's less about we want to try something new and more about we want to control the environment for AJ Russell. So we want him to get warmed up at his own pace. We want him to, get a good pregame routine. We don't want to have to rush him to get hot or, whatever, right? We don't want him to come in with runners on base. I guess they could control that too. But, you just want to make put him in the optimal position to succeed. And I think that's starting him because you can control that environment. So I think it's less about whether or not they believe in the freshman duo, because I think they do, and more about how can we most control the environment ahead of putting Russell on the mound. So I would expect, even if Russell starts, I think after that it'd be Coons and Krenzel, and we just go back to what they've been doing. So, but if you told me it goes really well for AJ Russell and they start feeling really good about it, probably not right away, but I don't know. It wouldn't shock me if we look up in Hoover and they're ready to kind of like turn him loose a little bit and let him start a game and get deep into a game. I wouldn't be shocked by that, but I would also be tempted, just in the interest of taking care of his arm. I'd also be interested in him being like another good bullpen piece for them. A guy, especially, given the quality of his stuff, his experience, all that, I would be really interested in seeing him as a bullpen piece as well. So obviously the thing for Tennessee is that they've been so good that they have options. They don't have to do anything. Like there's no pressure to rush him into the rotation in a real way because they don't need him. They're going to love having him. It's not like they've been, hurting for him. Right. So it will be interesting to see though. I'll be watching closely to see how that ends up turning out. One question I have for A&M is, does the challenge of Tennessee spark something, right? We know that Tennessee coming to town or facing Tennessee, because the series is in, I believe it's in Knoxville. Is that right? Do I have that right? Yeah. Sometimes I get those flipped. Hard to keep up with who's where every week. Whether it's you going to Tennessee or Tennessee coming to town, like sometimes the challenge of Tennessee and what that represents, defending national champions, all that, you're going to get a team's best shot. So does that spark something for A&M? I don't know. I don't know even if it did, I don't know that it would matter, right? With how good Tennessee's playing and how poorly A&M has played. And I just go back to last weekend against Kentucky. If A&M got some decent offense, and that's a Kentucky team that, A&M just frankly, in terms of raw talent, in terms of prospects, however you want to measure it, is more talented, but Kentucky's the better team. Right. And we saw that's what ended up mattering. But if A&M's not going to win that series against Kentucky, like it's hard to imagine them pulling something off in Knoxville. I suppose crazier things have happened, but maybe not many more crazy things. Right. So, and man, talk about a series that lost its luster in the preseason. I think there was in our D1 baseball chat, there was like a mad rush to cover this series because it looked like it was going to be the series of the year nationally. And it just hasn't. Obviously, it is not that. So, final series, Missouri and Arkansas. Man, Mizzou's really hurt on the mound. Even if they were healthy, I don't know how good they would be on the mound, but they were the last team that needed myriad mound injuries, and they're really going through it now. Ian Losey had been arguably their most consistent starter, and he left to start last weekend. They were hoping to bring back Daniel Whistler as a starter at some point. He started in the midweek, the Wednesday game against Arkansas Pine Bluff, and then appeared to re-aggravate an injury. They've had, obviously they lost Javen Pimentel to begin the season. So, it's kind of like when it rains, it pours a little bit for Mizzou. And so they're really hurt on the mound, and they can score a little bit. Their offense has been better than I anticipated, but it's just been overwhelmed by their inability to keep teams off the scoreboard. So it's just, baseball is a cruel game, right? Their offense has been better, but the pitching staff is disappointed. And so Mizzou ends up, in a worse place, frankly, than where they were at this time last year. So sitting at 0-9 in the league, and Arkansas is just a buzzsaw, man. They're playing really well. The offense has exceeded expectations. The pitching staff has been, maybe not the dominant force that we thought, but that's largely just kind of due to two things. One is the Gage Wood injury, which has kind of slid everybody up. Gabe Gackle has not been as good as we thought he might be, but Gackle is pitching better. Gage Wood could come back here at some point. Parker Coyle is now down in the bullpen. That's not great. He's been arguably their best reliever. You don't love that, but in general, I think the pitching is moving in a good direction. The offense obviously has been overwhelming. So Arkansas, just a buzzsaw. Really hard to see a positive result here from Missouri, with the way Arkansas is playing. This is another series where Mother Nature might have a say about it. So if you're Arkansas, you're really hoping to get these 3 games in, because this is an opportunity. You feel like this is an opportunity to make some hay and get a sweep and be greedy and go to 11-1, because in the SEC title race, that it feels like we all know that race is probably just going to be decided by 1 or 2 games. And it could come down to, did you sweep Mizzou or did you just win 2 of 3? And so this is an opportunity to get greedy for Arkansas. So they're going to want to get 3 games in. They're going to want to have the opportunity to sweep. All right. One more swipe through the comments here. Jake makes a good point. We kind of saw that with Burns a couple of years ago, moving him to the bullpen, and it worked. Yeah, different situations, obviously. AJ, an injury thing. Burns was more of just a consistency thing. But the comparison is valid, because, yeah, it just was clear that was a good role for Burns. Maybe we'll find the same thing with Russell. Todd Harris, good to see you, Todd. Excited to get a doubleheader today here in Lexington. The rain is finally clearing off this afternoon. Not sure they will get in a game on Saturday, as there is a lot more rain coming. Yeah, I'd love to get the 2 games today, Todd. I'm with you. Selfishly, I hope so, because I really want to see that series. But yeah, hope the rain holds off everywhere. Sounds like it's just going to be one of those weekends. Jay Seitler says Gamecock baseball makes me sad, Joe. Jay, I understand, man. It's been a tough season. It's they just. One of the more frustrating parts, and I said this last week, is that South Carolina's playing pretty well. They're playing hard. Like, it's not an effort problem. It's not a fundamentals problem. It's just that they're not good enough. They just don't have the players right now. I think this offseason is going to be big for South Carolina in terms of, especially because they're going to lose Ethan Petrie. So you're really going to have a hard reset. And they've got some young position players I really like, who I think are part of the next group, but they're going to have to go into the portal, do some work there, hold their recruiting class together, bring some impact guys to campus. It's going to be a big offseason for South Carolina, because it's just, they just don't have the dudes, and that's in the SEC. It's great if you can kind of like roster build your way to being a good team, even if you're not the most talented team, but you do have to have the dudes. That's just the long and the short of it. So big offseason coming up for them. Jake says SEC baseball and Final Four, great sports weekend. Could not agree more. 2 SEC teams in the men's Final Four. Auburn and Florida, they are only one will get to the final. They end up playing each other, so that's that. But should be a fun weekend. Looking forward to the Duke and Houston game as well. As someone who grew up a Houstonian, there's a little part of me that would like to see the Cougars. I did not go there, but there's part of me that would like to see the Cougars get this done and give Kelvin Sampson a national title. So, but you're right. Should be a fun weekend. Looking forward to the baseball and the basketball. Enjoy it, my friends. Thank you for all the great questions and comments. Looking forward to doing it again tomorrow morning as we recap Friday around the SEC. Little programming note, because of my travel schedule, tomorrow is going to probably go early. It's probably going to be on the early side of the morning. So, if you miss it early on, you'll always be able to watch the replay. But if you want to get in live, it's probably going to be early-ish tomorrow morning. So just be on the lookout for that. All right, folks, I'll talk to you in the morning. See ya.